This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Zach Gorchow.
And I'm Alethia Kasben. Big news this week in both the 2026 governor and U.S. Senate races.
Go on.
So Congressman John James, a Republican who represents Macomb County, announced he's running for governor. Other Republicans have been waiting on his announcement to decide what race, governor or U.S. Senate, they may jump into. James getting into this race is a key moment for the gubernatorial primary and may lead to some more movement in the U.S. Senate race, where no Republican has officially declared they are running. James talked to Newsmax about his decision to run for governor, and here is some of what he said.
Michigan is an amazing state, a state that I love, and I'm running because I love my state, but it's not the same state that I grew up in. My father came from the Jim Crow South for better opportunity. But right now, my children and many people's children and grandchildren in the state of Michigan are going to have to leave to find it. We deserve better. And I'm looking forward to leading with a prosperity agenda that all Michiganders can get behind to make Michigan great again.
State Senator Eric Nesbitt, who lives in Southwest Michigan, had been the only Republican in the governor's race. Now he's got company. And James has massive name recognition. He was the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate in 2018 against Debbie Stabenow and in 2020 against Gary Peters. Lost those races, but generally ran better than expected in both. In the last two cycles, he's won two competitive U.S. House races in the Detroit media market. He is very well known and very popular among Republican voters. Nesbitt is working to combine his leadership on conservative causes in Lansing with his farming background. The James resume, however, is tough. Business owner and military veteran.
Senator Nesbitt has been a leader in state Republican politics for more than a decade. But like you said, Zach, James has more of a national brand. You know, depending on how many other well-known Republicans end up in this primary, it will be interesting to see how James and Nesbitt run against each other. James also has a potential ally in President Donald Trump, which of course is huge. In his announcement, James said he and President Trump have been in each other's corners through thick and thin for the last 8 years.
You know, we've talked about the Trump factor many times. His endorsement has proven to be enormously important in statewide Republican primaries. He endorsed James in a competitive Republican primary in 2018 and again in 2020 when he was unopposed for the GOP nomination. Nesbitt would obviously love to have Trump's endorsement. He's been doing a lot of things on social media recently to show he's in alignment with Trump, and maybe he can make the case as a fresh face, noting James has lost twice in his previous statewide runs, albeit running well both times. But at a minimum, Nesbitt needs Trump to stay out of the race. A Trump endorsement of James, with James already so well known and liked among Republican voters, plus his well-known ability to raise tons of cash, would be very difficult for Nesbitt to overcome. But this isn't just a James versus Nesbitt race necessarily, is it, Alethia?
No, so some other Republicans are looking at this race. Former Attorney General Mike Cox is still exploring a run. Former House Speaker Tom Leonard, Perry Johnson, who ran in 2022 and ran for president briefly in 2024, another former 2022 candidate, Kevin Rinke, and of course, the Republican nominee for governor in 2022, Tudor Dixon, have all said that they are looking at it. Dixon actually said she's looking at governor and U.S. Senate. So with James in the governor's race, that might guide her decision. But, you know, there's a mix of potential in those names, right? Some are stronger than others. But I still think a Nesbitt and James primary is going to take up a lot of oxygen in this governor's race. And, you know, the James decision has some other ripple effects. He is leaving the 10th U.S. House District seat open. This is a seat that he could have easily kept in GOP hands for as long as he wanted to serve in it. And now he's creating, you know, this opening for Democrats.
Yes, Michigan's 10th U.S. House District in southern Macomb County quickly vaults to one of the most competitive congressional races in the nation. Both parties could be looking at competitive primaries there with further ripple effects depending on whether any state legislators run. The last time the seat was open, in 2022, it was extremely close. And Macomb County has a way of Macombing when it comes to politics. I'd expect nothing less in 2026.
We're going to take a short break. We've got a special expanded episode this week. When we come back, Zach and I are going to pick our jaws up off the floor and discuss the unbelievable Oval Office press conference on Wednesday with President Trump, Governor Whitmer, and Republican State House Speaker Matt Hall. Yes, you heard that right. Then we're going to switch gears and talk about the heart of Michigan's economy, the auto sector, and how Trump's tariffs might affect it. Stick around. Welcome back. I'm Alethia Kasben. Zach, sometimes the days and the news cycles blur together, but I don't think any of us will forget the sight on Wednesday of Governor Gretchen Whitmer live on national television in the Oval Office, seemingly unwittingly, alongside State House Speaker Matt Hall and on the turf and feet of her longtime foil and nemesis, President Donald Trump. What the heck happened?
What indeed? Just stunning. So Whitmer was in Washington to deliver a speech on the economy that definitely had 2028 presidential undertones. There was a lot of buildup to the speech. There was a lot of national media coverage. And certainly a lot of folks looking at like, this is Gretchen Whitmer starting to maybe dip her toe in the water for the presidential race. During the event, Whitmer let it be known that she had a meeting with the president and members of his cabinet later that day. And she also revealed, this was sort of the first big shocker, that Republican State House Speaker Matt Hall would be joining in those meetings. Then just after 4 p.m., it happened. Reporters in the Oval Office for a press conference with Trump began posting to social media that Whitmer was in the Oval Office too, and Trump was saying nice things about her. And then there was a photo showing Whitmer standing uncomfortably off to the side, looking absolutely stricken. And that may be an understatement. There is a lot to unpack there.
So much.
Can you give it a try, though?
You know, I think I could talk about this for an hour, so I hope everyone has the time. No, just kidding. But this was just an incredible turn of events. First, let's focus here on President Trump and what he said. So he called Governor Whitmer a very good person. Okay. He said she is doing an excellent job.
Okay.
Yes, he said those things. We just celebrated the 5-year anniversary. I guess celebrate is the wrong word, but it was just the 5-year anniversary of when he boosted her national status even more in 2020 by calling her the woman from Michigan in a not nice way. He has visited Michigan many times for his own campaign events, for others, and I don't think he has ever said very nice things about the governor. Certainly Republicans in Michigan don't say nice things about the governor and the job that she is doing. But also, he said these things in the Oval Office when cameras originally were not scheduled to be there. He invited press in unexpectedly. And Governor Whitmer didn't realize that was going to happen, apparently.
Whitmer looked like she'd rather rewatch her beloved Detroit Lions getting blown out in the playoffs again than stand there in the Oval Office. It's an incredible photo that one of the reporters took. Her last visit to the White House about a month or so ago was not publicly announced in advance. News of that meeting was confirmed by the governor's team, not the president's. This time around, I felt it was pretty clear Trump and his team decided we're going to control the narrative surrounding this meeting and make it clear who's president and who's not.
Totally. And, you know, Governor Whitmer has been cordial with President Trump. You know, when she was in D.C. and she gave that speech, like you said, she was criticizing his tariff policy generally, but highlighted where they agree and bringing more manufacturing to the U.S. You know, we've seen this for months, you know, her new strategy here. But images of Governor Whitmer in the Oval Office being praised by the president while standing next to Republican Speaker Hall might be a bridge too far for many Democrats. I mean, just this week, the Michigan Democratic Party blasted Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan for appearing with Hall at a roundtable supporting legislation they agree on.
Are you trying to suggest there might be a double standard here in politics? I'm shocked, absolutely shocked. Yeah, there's no question in my mind. If Governor Whitmer is actually planning to run for president in 2028, the president's comments talking about how great she is are going to be played on a loop in ads by her Democratic rivals. And to be clear, some of those potential rivals were taking shots at her before this meeting even happened. The governor of Colorado was turning the governor's own words against her on tariffs, sort of putting down a line there. J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, has been really leading the charge against Trump in a big way, in a really different way from how Whitmer is approaching it. Michigan Democrats, I felt like got collective lip lock. You could hear the crickets emanating about this from them. But you could see a number of national Democratic pundits and commentators. I don't know what wincing looks like on Twitter, but it was happening.
So we have obviously what's happening with the Democrats and sort of wincing at the governor being there. But were Republicans wincing too? I mean, you have the president who just said that Whitmer is doing an excellent job and is a very good person. John James, who just announced for governor, who is an ally of President Trump, who was also mentioned in this meeting as someone who's talked to Trump about Agent Carp, called Whitmer a Marxist in an interview, I think, just yesterday, and said he wants to make Michigan great again. So we have two sides of this coin here where I agree. I think Trump, I think the president's team did want to control this narrative. But then why did he say such very positive things about the governor?
I feel like, pour one out for Michigan's partisan operatives. Yesterday was a really, really hard day, or Wednesday was a really, really hard day. I think maybe for Republicans, there's probably some comfort in the fact that the governor really looked uncomfortable and was in a difficult position there with how the president was talking about all sorts of other, very, Republican red meat issues, and she could do nothing other than stand on and look on. But I did see at least one Republican state representative lamenting on social media about the president elevating the governor again and asking why he would do that. So it was definitely at odds with this Republican narrative that, Gretchen Whitmer's record is terrible. She's a lousy governor. And all of a sudden you have Trump saying she's great.
Totally. And while I do think the governor could not turn this into anything for 2028, I think if she was running in a Democratic primary, like you said, for president, this would not look good, no matter what happens between now and then. But in the next year and a half, when she's trying to deal with Republicans in the legislature, this could potentially be somewhat helpful. She could potentially leverage this into putting some pressure on Republican Speaker Matt Hall to negotiate with her and her office. And Trump did say he wanted to help with Agent Carp issue, get Selfridge restarted in Macomb County. So, these are things that the state has been asking for from the federal government that could get, some real attention from the White House.
The governor's mantra has been that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And she's going to have to prove this isn't a case of being at the table and on the menu. She's going to have to leverage this into some wins. Things like getting the president to release the funds for the chips plant in Genesee County that she badly wants. She's going to have to get something from Matt Hall, the Speaker of the House. And the thing she wants the most is road funding. There was a really interesting moment among many interesting moments in this Oval Office thing yesterday, where the president asked Hall and Whitmer, you guys get along, right? And, Whitmer's body language on that was just fascinating. She kind of stepped forward, gave Hall a bump with the shoulder and said 70% of the time. And, when I saw that, I read that to mean, you owe me, buddy. I just took this one on the chin here. So don't think I'm not going to forget this.
Yeah, I mean, we will see what happens from here, but just what an incredible day, an incredible moment. And gosh, I mean, what can happen from here?
It just goes to show again, Michigan politics can always surprise. It was quite a scene in the office when word began to spread that the governor was in the Oval Office and Trump was holding a live press conference. It's definitely a day I'm going to remember for a long time.
Well, thanks, Zach. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Glenn Stevens from MichAuto.
Hello, my name is Hernz Laguerre Jr., producer of MichMash. MichMash was named the winner of the Michigan Association of Broadcasters Community Involvement Award for 2024 and a Merit Award for Special Interest and Cultural Programming. This wouldn't have been possible without you, our listeners and supporters. We're looking forward to bringing you more important and sometimes under the radar stories in 2025. Thank you for listening. And now back to your regular scheduled MichMash programming.
Welcome back. I'm Zach Gorchow. Joining us now is Glenn Stevens Jr. Glenn is the executive director of MichAuto, an advocacy group for the state's automotive and mobility industries. Glenn, we'd like to welcome you, leader of MichAuto, to this episode of MichMash.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for your time today.
So, Glenn, we are recording on Wednesday. About 2 hours before we started this interview, President Trump suddenly paused his tariffs on goods from other nations, except for China, for 90 days, throwing our entire interview into question. So, with the caveat that we don't know what will happen between now and Friday when our listeners will hear this discussion, what do you make of this latest twist, and what does it mean for Michigan's auto sector?
Well, unless it changes, which is possible, what happened today is good for the economy. No question about that. But it doesn't change the state of the tariffs that are in place for the auto industry, which is our signature industry. And I've been doing a little bit of quick work to verify that. But the tariffs that are in place on imported vehicles, imported components, the steel and aluminum tariffs, those are still in place. The sectoral tariffs, as they're called, are not part of the reciprocal relief that was given today. So we're still in it, so to speak, with regards to the challenges for our industry here.
So prior to this pause or extension or whatever we want to call it, were we seeing real world impact on the Detroit 3 automakers and all of the part suppliers that make up the state's auto sector as a whole yet?
Yes, we were, for a couple reasons. First of all, we're not coming off of too far being removed from the pandemic. And I bring that up because companies had to make a lot of adjustments, had to get even leaner, had to really buckle down with regards to what happened and transpired for over 2 years. And then we got into this electrification craze, or all the investment, all the capital was being spent on that. And as you know, that's kind of backed off a little bit too. Now, electrification's continuing, but it's slowed down, but not the capital that these companies had to put out there, the buildings, the lines that they built. So there's a lot of companies that are feeling a financial pressure of an electrification market that hasn't quite materialized yet. And now comes tariffs. So really, it's a fragile system, and it's a very, very complex supply chain that's under a lot of stress right now. And this tariff situation puts it under even more stress, and that's a concern to us.
Are cars going to get more expensive for consumers, or do we not know that yet?
Well, they haven't yet. There hasn't been a lot of announcements on pricing. Some companies have made some announcements. Hyundai said they were going to freeze their pricing. Stellantis and Ford actually extended their employee pricing to all consumers. So there's an effort to keep the market stimulated and strong. But I think the answer to the question is, if tariffs persist, we are absolutely going to see an increase in vehicle prices. And the reason for that is because the input costs stack up to the supply chain as you build the components up to the assembly plant. And a lot of cost is being added to the system. And that either has to be absorbed by the companies, and that means profits are going to take a hit, or it is passed along. And I think inevitably we're going to see it passed along. The problem there is the average transaction price for a vehicle is already near $49,000 in the U.S. And if it goes much higher, that will suppress demand. And that's not a good thing either for the market.
So how shielded is Michigan for now, if at all, because any goods compliant with the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement, which replaced NAFTA, are exempt from the U.S. tariffs?
Yes, it's somewhat shielded because the administration has said that that's only temporary until we figure out a methodology. Now, there's such a dramatic change today with what was just announced on reciprocals. What we are doing as an association, what the industry is doing, what the automotive executive leadership are doing, other industry associations is saying, let's exclude automotive, particularly automotive components from the tariffs. And let's also make sure that we get back to using the USMCA trade agreement because it works. It was renegotiated as a new agreement under the first Trump administration. So there was his signature on that and his belief in that. And we'd like to see the trade bloc that means Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. not only be strong, but get stronger. And so that's what we're going to continue to beat that drum about.
So can you talk a little bit more, about those conversations on excluding auto from the tariffs? So I know Governor Gretchen Whitmer gave her speech this morning where she also said that. She said, let's leave autos and energy out of the tariffs. Let's keep those out. So first, I guess, thoughts on that. Do you support that? You obviously support that position. And
Absolutely.
are these conversations ongoing with President Trump's administration? Like, do you think there could be any breakthrough here?
I'm hopeful there will be. And are those conversations happening constantly? All the way to the top, Mary Barra, Jim Farley, Mr. Alcan from Stellantis, they are communicating directly. So are executives at the major top supplier level. So are executives from small companies literally getting on a plane and going to DC. But we're also communicating with our federal delegation. We sent a letter to Commerce Secretary, Treasury Secretary, and U.S. Trade Rep offices asking for all the things which I just kind of laid out there. So constant communication, and I'm hopeful.
So China this week raised its tariff on U.S. goods to 104%. This seems kind of staggering, but then just as staggering, President Trump raised the U.S. tariff on Chinese goods to 125%. They were the only ones who are not subject to this pause. Is there any impact on Michigan from this part of the trade war? And if so, what is it?
The first answer to your question is yes, there is, because we are interconnected, our two industries, on lots of different forms of commerce, including agriculture, but certainly with automotive, they are. The quantifying it, though, is very difficult right now. There has been a de-emphasis, I would say, the last decade on China and components there, but it's still very heavy. It's just such a massive industrial base that has grown over the last several decades that it has become a global player in all sectors. Now, this is also a challenge for us because this is an auto industry that exists in China now, which didn't exist not that long ago. And that is a force that Michigan and our United States economy and our USMCA economies have to deal with. And here's where strategic tariffs do come into play and can be utilized. No one's against tariffs as long as they're used strategically, but the wide sweeping ones that we're seeing, including the ones to your question about China, are of concern.
So let's look at the president's stated goal, or at least what we think his stated goal is. Not sure how the pause affects it. By making it more expensive for automakers to make vehicles in other nations or parts of vehicles in other nations, it will force those automakers to instead beef up manufacturing in the United States and hire more American workers. Is that realistic?
Yes and no. It's realistic over a long period of time where companies know for certain that they're going to have consistent policy and consistent business climate and a trade scenario that they know are going to be in place. Then you make billion-dollar decisions. To make billion-dollar decisions in capital expenditures and bricks and mortar and all that goes around building a new assembly plant or even moving a major production facility or line, it takes a lot of time to do that. So is it possible? Yes. But in the short term, it's not an environment where anyone's going to make that decision. And so we're not going to see that in the short term. But the stated goal is, do we want to increase U.S. manufacturing? Do we want to increase it in Michigan? Absolutely. But even excluding tariffs and even excluding everything that's going on, we have to be more competitive. And really, that's what we've all been driving on and focused on. Frankly, this tariff situation has taken our eye off that ball. But we'll get back to it because this is a very resilient industry, which has been through a lot. And it'll get through this too.
Michigan is down about 250,000 manufacturing jobs in the wake of NAFTA, which started in the mid-1990s. Trade critics blame NAFTA for this. Do you agree?
Well, we have a couple more hours to dissect that, and I'm not a trade expert, so I won't go too deep into that. NAFTA was a great agreement when it was put into place. But the world changed around NAFTA very quickly, and NAFTA became obsolete and had many loopholes that needed to be corrected. It was probably left in place far too long as it existed. Did it contribute to loss of manufacturing? Potentially and probably yes. But, production of OEM assembly plants was shifting into the South and the Mid-South in the United States, not into Mexico or Canada, before it really started to shift heavily into Mexico. So, which is why the President Trump said in his first administration, no, this agreement needs to be fixed. It needs to be blown up. It needs to be improved upon. And there were some major improvements put in place really to stopgap some of that erosion. And we'd like to see that stronger. So it is kind of a yes and no question. At the end of the day, though, Michigan is not in a bubble. The Great Lakes region's not in a bubble. We have to be able to compete and do the things to compete.
So can you elaborate more on what you think needs to change in the current U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement?
Well, one of the things that's pretty clear, we've had our eye on this for several years now, is China has used Mexico as an entry point. The amount of investment that China has put from supplier parks, from dealerships, they have not built an assembly plant, but they have been rumored to for the last year or so. That is one thing that needs to be addressed. And if USMCA is going to work effectively, Mexico or really it could be Canada, but it doesn't really from a geography standpoint and a size and scope of industry standpoint play like Mexico does. But Mexico cannot be a loophole for example, the Chinese to enter the U.S. market. And I'm pretty certain that's not going to continue.
The president, some of his supporters, and quite a few Democrats who lean protectionist make the argument that it's about time the federal government did something to help U.S. workers in a global economy that has tended to reward companies for moving production outside the United States to nations with lower wages and working conditions that aren't up to U.S. standards. And that the price paid in the stock market, if some of the downtrends earlier in the week continue, is worth it. Understanding that the president did pause these tariffs seems like a pullback from that big picture goal. What do you say to that?
Well, again, I'm not a trade expert, although I think I could play one on TV after the last couple of months. If you look at, let's just set auto aside for a second, then we'll come back to it. iPhones, they find the supply chains have found the lowest cost, highest quality components to bring our American consumers, which have benefited from the prices of these global consumer products. I've seen some projections. I mean, are we going to pay $2,300 for an iPhone because it's made in the United States? I mean, that's something we're really going to have to look at. But let's talk about the auto industry, because that's what we're talking about today. At the top end, the vehicle has to stay competitive for the consumer to be able to afford it and buy it. And consumer loans have already stretched out. The average length of a used vehicle is on the road way too long. And I say that because safety comes into play with some of these vehicles. But when you look at, do we need to be more competitive? Yes. But do we need to employ more American workers? Yes. And I look at the UAW. The UAW is one of the major reasons that this state is the state that it is. They played a huge role in the growth of this industry. They built the vehicles. Do we want more assembly lines, and do we want more product in Michigan's 12 assembly plants? And it'd be nice to have another 1 or 2 assembly plants. Absolutely. But they have to be, they, meaning us, including labor. I mean, it's labor, business, and government have to be at the table together here in Michigan for us to be globally competitive. So I think that it's important to note that while there's opportunities with certain products to make, onshoring, it's not going to be everything, but we're going to have to be competitive. And automation is going to play a huge role, which means skilled trades are going to play a huge role. We don't have enough skilled tradespeople right now.
So I've seen, a couple interesting statistics in sort of all of the reporting on tariffs, and maybe I should have known this one, but I did not. So the Michigan auto sector, every auto job supports 3 other jobs. Can you talk about, what this industry means to Michigan, even for those who don't work for these companies, and, what kind of ripple effects it could have if, all these things we're talking about, prices go up, demand goes down, if these things do happen?
Yes, 3 is a conservative number. It's probably arguably 7 when you look at all the multiplier effects in a community. And I'll give you a story, a real example of something that happened the other day. I was doing a piece for somebody and I mentioned this multiplier effect. I can't remember what outlet it was. And a friend of mine who owns a coffee shop in one of the northern suburbs texted me and he goes, "Hey, I saw your interview and you really did a nice job, but I'm just glad somebody's talking about the multiplier effect because his business is tied to the impact that this industry has on our state and the success of the communities that these companies operate, whether it's a large one, it's the Warren Tech Center or the Mack Avenue Assembly Plant or a small stamping facility in Albion, Michigan. These jobs affect other jobs. And that's why it's such an important part of our history, our DNA, and our economy.
Well, Glenn, thanks so much for joining us on MichMash this week and kind of rolling with the punches and breaking news. And who knows, maybe things are going to change 5 more times in the next 48 hours.
Likely will, and let's hope the winds blow in the direction of relief for the auto industry. We can get back to doing what we do best. Thanks, everybody.